support of the Indian Association for Palliative Care. And as we wait for everybody to settle down a little bit, I will just take you through some housekeeping for the next 90 minutes. All attendees will be able to use the chat box, so please feel free to do that. And I will look for your questions. And if you have any comments or questions to the panelists, in particular, any panelists, then please mention that. And we will attend to those questions after the first round of discussions that we have with the experts themselves. I encourage all of you to please have handy the toolkit that was created by Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, that was sent to you as a link with your confirmation email. It has the template for the latest advanced medical directives. It has a ready reckoner, which will give you context of how advanced care planning has evolved in India, what its current status is, and also certain pathways of care and implementation of the advanced medical directives. And it also has a very, very comprehensive FAQs document, frequently asked questions document. And whether you're a healthcare worker or whether you're a patient or a carer, you will find that almost every question that you have is answered in that document. And I'd like to especially thank Dr. Dhvani Mehta and the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy for creating that FAQs document, which I think is a real masterpiece in terms of the questions that people might have uh, related to advanced care planning in general and the advanced medical directives in particular. So I think I also want everybody here to know that the meeting is being recorded. So if some reason people are unable to stay for the duration of the meeting, this recording will also be available after the webinar is over. So with that, I would like to invite Dr. Sushma Bhatnagar, who is the president of the Indian Association for Palliative Care, for a few introductory remarks. Dr. Sushma, I know you're having some technical difficulties
Yes.
with the video, but we'd love to hear from you.
So thank you, Smriti. I'm sorry I'm working with my camera to start, but before that, I just want to say my apology again. But thank you, Smriti, for inviting me for this webinar, where all the leading people, those who are working in this area for the country, are have already joined. I just want to say, on behalf of Indian Association of Palliative Care, I would like to congratulate that you are discussing with all the eminent people most important thing which is required for this country, because I have seen that whether patient is in the community or in the at home or at hospice or in the institute, it is always difficult to discuss and it is always, and the most of the time doctors are not equipped, and doctors don't feel empowered to discuss death, or we should say that end is near. So how we can empower doctors, plus how we can make them, because what I have seen, that once you feel empowered to discuss these issues, patients and their family members are ready to listen and ready to accept what you are saying. Only thing, what this is my 100% experience, that most of the time medical fraternity need to feel very brave, very empowered, how they can discuss these. And because they don't discuss, because most of the time they are very worried
കേട്ടില്ല.
about issues. They are worried about the legal issues.
അത് അതിനൊരു പ്രശ്നമുണ്ട്, നോക്കട്ടെ.
They are worried about the legal issues, and what exactly patient and relatives will feel. So this is a important discussion, and I'm really happy that today you have taken up this topic. We will discuss probably will all the important aspects about the advanced directive, living will, etc. And these are the things which everybody, not only the doctors and the patient, but the whole community and every person of this country should understand that when end is inevitable, there is a way to make it very beautiful and dignified. Thank you very much, Smriti, for inviting me over here, and I will be there throughout this meeting, and I will open my camera as soon as it will start working. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sushma. We're really grateful for your presence here, and also very grateful for your leadership as the president of the Indian Association for Palliative Care. and under your leadership, we've been able to make many important, we've taken many important steps ahead. One of these important steps is the formation of an advanced care planning task force at the national level, which was formed at the Indian Association for Palliative Care conference in February this year in 2024. And 11 people have come together to really improve death literacy in the country, to help unpack these difficult conversations. And we're going to be working at full steam to make sure that sooner than later, advanced care planning becomes more of a reality in India. So thank you very much again for your leadership. Um, I'd like to begin by just sort of setting the context for this webinar. On the 8th of May, there was an article that was published by two of our speakers here today, Dr. Parth Sharma and Dr. Rajagopal, and it appeared in the Hindu, and it talked about how people in India were dying badly and what was needed in order to change that. And we realized how important this topic was, because just when that article came out, the Advance Directives link on our Pallium India website alone got over 500 hits. What that really tells us is that people are waiting to have this conversation. They may not have the vocabulary for it, they may not know where to start, but once we put it out there, more people than expected are actually really keen to have this conversation. And that has been our experience. I think I speak for everyone here that um, once that door is opened, a lot of people are willing to walk through it. So on the surface, it might appear that we are a death denying society, and we are to a large extent. But I think especially after the pandemic, after increasing losses that we're experiencing in the country, where even non-communicable diseases are on the rise, so many other things are going on, people are becoming more aware that we are, in fact, we are mortal, and so we better talk about it. And just to go back a little bit, in 2010, the Economist Intelligence Unit had conducted this study in which they studied how people died in different countries, and they called it the Quality of Death Index. And it was based on 24 indicators across 4 categories. I won't get into those, but that is available for you to read online, and I think our tech team will also share a link to it. And in 2010, India ranked 29 out of 30 countries. That's a pretty abysmal ranking. 2015 saw India at 67 out of 80, and 2021 saw us at 57 out of 81. So marginal improvement. So clearly, we have a long way to go. And while we speak about living well and quality of life, it is equally important to talk about the quality of death. And because death is inevitable, and it's probably one of the things that we can have a say in if we get to it soon enough. And so, for all of you present today, I'm very glad that you're here, and we're here to have this conversation with people who really know what they're talking about. So, to start off, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for the hour, and it is Dr. Rajagopal. Dr. Raj, as many of you here know, is the chairman emeritus at Pallium India. And Dr. Rajagopal, if you can turn your video on, please, we'll get started. So I think the first question that I want to just pose to you before we move ahead is, you've been in the line of palliative care for a long time. You've been the pioneer in the field, and I'd like to hear from you. What do you think is the current landscape of death and dying in our country, and have things improved since you began as a practitioner? And you've always been invested in how people live as well as how they die. So can we just start with you, and if you could just let us know your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Smriti. Thank you, Sushma, for that introduction. And hello, everybody. Uh, I know, I know I should be starting with some positive news. I should be talking about happy things. I keep saying that we all should be aware of a fact that death is the inevitable consequence of life. That's a strength. Once we realize that, we can go through the rest of our lives meaningfully. Yes, true. But now I'm saying, don't die in India. It's not safe. Unless you are lucky enough to be hit by a truck and die on the spot, which kind of sudden death happens only to 10 to 15% of people, at least 85% chance is that we will go through a prolonged illness. And if that happens, at some point, when it happens to me, when my when Dr. Parth doesn't know, Dr. Yadev doesn't know whether I'm likely to come back or not, you may have put in a nasogastric tube. At some point, it becomes clear that that's not happening. And I am showing, though I am unable to speak, showing signs of distress, signs of pain. You then realize that you are, by giving me artificial life support, you are only prolonging my suffering. My family pleads with you, take this off. But despite all the things that we have been doing, that Dr. Raj, Dr. Roop, Gursahani, Dhvani, spot precious support. In spite of all that you are doing, while there is progress on the legal front, Smriti, you asked for progress. Compared to the 2018 Supreme Court verdict, which put in very cumbersome processes for withdrawal of life support, the 2023 verdict has made it much simpler. But is simpler really good enough? That's another question. Is simpler good enough? Well, to look on the positive side, these discussions are happening. These people have taken so much of trouble to go to the court, make all the arguments, and get that kind of simplification done. But friends, let me point out that it is not only a legal matter. Mahesh, can you share that one image that I showed you? Uh, okay, is the legal issue the only issue that is potentially preventing a good death for me? I mean, this is what I think. It is not from any official document. I think the first barrier is doctors' perception of duty of care. As you hinted, Smriti, I have been here for a long time, uh, half a century. So I have seen that change since the turn of the century. Before that, in the last millennium, intensive care was for people who could be brought back to life. It's a new phenomenon that any death happens in an intensive care setting if you are in a hospital. The young doctors who have seen only that actually believe that they have a due responsibility to prolong life, which to them means not the broad definition of life, which to them means only a beating heart. I think this is where the will come round, but not everybody. If they have the love that is the selfish kind, I can't let my dad go, then they may want everything done, what typically is called everything. But it is our job to change that line of thinking from I cannot let my dad go to my dad must be suffering so much. If it is time for him to go, let him go. And the societal view, it is so miserable to see that today the educated, affluent, and middle class people actually think that intensive care unit is the right place to die. That has become the norm. Within only 25 years, that has happened. Now they will have to be brought into the dialogue. We'll talk more about it perhaps. And of course, the fact that legal clarity is not there is a huge issue. Uh, Once again, thank you, Dhvani, for taking this on. I hope we will have a law pretty soon. But then I'm scared. I'm even more scared. Okay, the Supreme Court changed its verdict in 5 years, reviewed it. How many decades will it take to an act of parliament to be amended? I know that we were at it for almost 2 decades before we could get the NDPS Act amended. That is next to impossible. So, unless the public perception changes, all the other changes will be more difficult. Smriti, I'll stop there because others have so much input to give.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Mahesh, can you stop the share?
Thank you, Dr. Raj, for setting the tone for our conversation. I think every point that you made is really vital. And we have to look at it not just from the perspective of progress and what we think is progress, when it comes to just policy and legislation, but really is it getting people where they need to go on the ground? Because ultimately, the true measure of success for any policy, for any directive or order or anything is how accessible it is to the person who ultimately needs it. So I think that point came through very beautifully, and thank you again for sharing your experience with us. I'm going to quickly go over to Dr. Yadev for to take us to answer one particular question that I have. And Dr. Yadev is he's here with us from the palliative care division at the Government Medical College in Kollam. And first of all, Dr. Yadev, I'll thank you once again for initiating this webinar. Dr. Yadev, my question is that I understand from previous conversations with you that it was really a personal experience that prompted you to, take up palliative care as something that you're passionate about. And can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was, both from a professional as well as from a personal setting, and what I'm going to ask? It might be a bit difficult, but what was most difficult about that whole experience for you? Please, Dr. Yadav.
Okay. Good evening, all. Actually, there was a long gap between that particular experience and my foray into palliative care. A long gap, long years that actually filled with vacuum. I'll come to. My father died because of after he had a prostatic carcinoma. There was about 48 years between me and age difference between me and him. He was actually a sannyasi at Ramakrishna Mission. Then relinquished that. Then joined politics. Then married my mama, at least who at her home he was hiding at 18 years. And so there was a personal connection between me and him, like a grandfather. He was so dear to me.
Sorry, one moment, please. Um, Sushma ma'am, I think you have clicked on screen share. If you could. Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, Dr. Yadav, please proceed.
He was actually kind of my philosopher, spiritual guru, friend whom I can converse anything, even my darkest secrets. Then on sudden day, he was diagnosed with prostatic carcinoma. That is very in the late stages, and there's nothing we could do. And urologist told there is nothing we could do. And only one thing we could have done is orchidectomy. And I am a surgeon. I used to operate a lot of patients, but never a relative, never a neighbor, never a person I know. Because I don't know how that was the way we were brought up. Because those people who are near to us, we don't operate. And my father was very adamant that I should operate him. I should do orchidectomy for him. He was very adamant. Otherwise, none should operate me. Then I operated him. He told me with 5 years or 6 years of experience, you can have a technical skill. He was a philosopher, like a philosopher. But you have to bypass your emotional block. If you operate a relative, you will overcome that fears. That I'll give you my chance. You do orchidectomy, the organ I created you with, you take it away.
Dr. Yadev.
Okay, it's okay, it's okay. I operated him, and after then after 6 months or something, he developed a stroke, and he was in ICU at a private hospital. Then we took him to after 1 month or some. I took him to Toronto Medical where I worked. That time I never heard of this palliative care. We admitted in the ICU. Usually we talked about death and all. I asked him many times what you want once you die and then like that. But that was never about something like an advanced care planning or anything. It was not about what treatment he wants and then where he has to, what we had to do after his death and like that. But we never thought about this because I was not at all aware of this palliative care. So I thought the best care I can give him is getting him in an ICU. So I got him in an ICU. And when I was in an OP, the colleague there in the ICU anesthetist called me that, Yadav, come here, we have to intubate you. And I went there in the ICU, and particular doctor, I don't want to name him, he told me we have to intubate him immediately. I saw my father telling, showing his figures, no, no. I still remember that. Then we intubated him after 2 3 days. He was extubated, and I had to get him out of that ICU. I went after a neurologist, sir. He was very close to me, and he allowed me to put him in the ICU there in the neurology ICU. My mom, Amma was very adamant that she will sit outside the ICU along with the other bystanders. We were in. He was always there in the ICU till he died. After that incident, he never talked. Though he could talk to others, he never talked. Then what happened was, actually the point was, I was thinking that I was being the best care. Every day, everywhere we taking blood, sodium, potassium, and whatnot. And one day his whole body was swollen, and we could not get an IV line. I got my friend, Dr. Roy from the I went to my anesthetic friend. He told me, okay, Dr. Roy, the cardiothoracic surgeon, Dr. Vinu, the cardiothoracic surgeon, will come and do that. He is my close friend, and he asked me, why, Yadav, why should we do this central? Why should we put in the central line? Why should we give this do all these things? Anyway, he is dying. But my grandma, I mean my mutama, that means my mother's elder sister, she was also asking, why don't you bring him back? Because I was thinking that I was giving the best care. And from the most hard, difficult part for me was I actually wished his death. Because after some 20 days or 17 days, I was totally fed up. He was my best friend, my best friend. But still, I wished his death because my whole life was in total disarray. I was always in the hospital in a room, my family is somewhere else. My whole life was totally disorganized. And people started saying something. Why is suffering like this? Why can't God take him away? Actually, that is not the problem. Actually, I want him die. My relatives don't want to specify that word. They will say that, why is he suffering like that? Why can't God just take him away? I was just analyzing myself. I found that I wanted his death because it was affecting my life. That time I didn't know anything about this caregiver burden. Now I know. Then there was a long years of some 6 to 7 years of vacuum. I tried to fill with the cinema, book reading, joining a lot of courses because I don't have anybody to talk to. Then on finally, I think some 11 o'clock or somebody, my HOD called me to attend a meeting. That was the first time I heard about palliative care. And I had some, then we had some professional, some research relation with that, my mentor. Still, I was so afraid of getting into palliative care because Yes, my father's experience changed me my whole life. Though I didn't know about the palliative care, what I did after that was when I start my OP, I close my doors because I knew that privacy is very important. Instead of the stool, I started giving chairs to my patients and bystanders. I was just asking, why should the bystanders stand before me? The moment I come to my OP, still I do it in my surgery OP here. When I come to my OP, I will put two chairs instead of a stool. Then I could feel myself in their position when I was talking. But that was all empathy only, maybe because of meditation. It was never compassion. It was never actions. The moment they are gone from my room, they are just gone, just went into some strangers. But the moment they were there, I could feel their emotions. I remember my father telling me about something like reading some neurology books, some Ramayendra novel. Later, came to read about that books also, something called Mirror Neuro. Then my friend, Dr. Jijo, he used to tell me that, why you make people cry? I thought my voice was so tough. Only very later I met my mentor. I came to know that if the people are crying, I am letting. It is always good because they can they break out. That is good. I left. I had my professional career some 6 years or 7 years thinking that my voice is so terrible, monotonous. That is why they cry. Because again, I was the only confusion over why they come back again and again to me. Teacher was telling me why you make people cry. Your sound is so arrogant or something like that. Maybe. Now after some time, when I got transferred to Kollam, I had to start what I am most afraid of, palliative care. Dr. Baburaj was not there at Kollam. We had to create a palliative setup. I had to get the fellowship. In that meeting, I still remember my mentor telling, Rajagopal sir telling, there is one guy here who cries when he sees pain, but that won't happen. That still happens. And in our OP, what I found in my as a person, as a patient, my father as the patient, and me, though I am at a very high position who can control everything, after 3 or 4 days, the blood I go with to the lab, they will say, "Sir, wait," because they used to treat me just like some other fellows. So the long wait. So when we started our OP, we implemented dignity in our system because it all gone through. I have gone through. I think the time is over.
Dr. Yadav, I would like to first of all offer you just deep respect for, as a surgeon, as a doctor, to come here and be vulnerable in front of so many people. It is not something we see often or even rarely. Um, I'm a little at a loss for words after hearing your story. So many things that you said have really struck a chord, and I can't imagine. I mean, as a caregiver, sometimes you are, I think, to some extent, ignorance helps us plow through because we have the healthcare system telling us what to do. As a doctor, sometimes you're able to do it because you're not emotionally attached to the patient. But to be in this unique position where you are your father's, your best friend's doctor, is a singularly difficult position. And I really want to thank you for being vulnerable and to share that. It's a very powerful story that you just shared with us. And the fact that you wished him death, overcoming all this learning that healthcare workers and especially doctors have about death being failure, it just speaks to how deeply affected you were. And I think that is unfortunately a very common story in India, where actually when the person dies, we are relieved because the suffering is over. um, I am sitting also with that existential crisis or spiritual crisis that you experienced for so many years before the path of palliative care opened up to you, and that you took up with such vigor and fear. You alluded to the fact that you were afraid, but the fact that you went in there, and now that you're a doctor who offers a chair to a patient and the caregiver, and the fact that they're no longer just patients and bystanders but human beings, It's a very heavy cost you paid to get here, but I would just like to say that you being in this position today must be a blessing to so many people. I'm going to break a little bit from our format because this is such a powerful story. And just for a minute, I want to pass the mic on to our other speakers, to Dhvani, to Dr. Raj, to Parth, to just share some reflections on what Dr. Yadev has shared, because I think even with the audience, we need to sit with the story for a few minutes. So if Dr. Raj or Dr. Parth or Dr. Dhvani want to share something, please unmute, and then we will proceed with other speakers.
I will let Dhvani and Parth take the floor. Just want to share one point, just a couple of sentences. I have visited Yadav's palliative care clinic. When a patient enters there, the person there, that can be a nurse, a doctor, a social worker, or a volunteer, gets from the chair, folds hands, and welcomes the patient. My God, I couldn't believe my eyes. I'm so glad that I lived to this day to see such a thing happening. Somebody being given respect, the respect that everyone owes to every other human being. Thank you, Yadav, for what you are.
Parth, you had unmuted.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Yadev, for sharing that. I mean, it brought forth so many other stories which I have seen people suffer. I've heard patients tell me that my father begs me to kill him because he is going through so much pain that he can't sleep, he can't eat, and he begs me to just kill him, just uh, suffocate him, put a pillow on his head, and so many other stories which sort of make me really feel really frustrated and also very helpless at the same time. And thank you for your courage for taking some action and addressing that suffering, even it was at the personal level, which is even more difficult than doing it for somebody else. So thanks a lot for that and for sharing your story.
Dhvani?
Yes, I just want to echo what Parth and Dr. Rajagopal have said. First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Yadav, for sharing this experience. As a lot of people in the chat are also saying they have had similar stories. Dr. Rajagopal told me yesterday, everyone has their story. This is something that affects all of us. And I only hope that the power of stories like yours, Dr. Yadav, and the action that you have taken after it is enough to move well, of course, the medical community, the healthcare community, educate patients, laypersons. But I hope that these stories also reach the voices of people in public administration, lawmakers who can do something about this and should do something about this. What to them might appear as a messy issue that they don't want to get involved in, have nothing to do with, think this is a question for Western countries. I hope that stories like this show them that this is a matter of cause and concern and action for everyone in India as well.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for your reflections. And thank you to all the participants also who have been sharing in the chat. I just want to address one point that was raised. In this particular webinar format, yes, the participants, the attendees are on mute and cannot unmute, but the chat box is open, so you can still communicate with us. And if you have questions, we will take them. But in this particular platform, I'm afraid participants are not allowed to unmute themselves. So please forgive us for that. But I hope that you're still able to get your point across. Um, so I think between Dr. Raj and Dr. Yadev, we see the current status. We see, well, some of the progress we've made. We've seen the challenges on a professional and personal level. I'd like to now move towards what we are here to also discuss, which is the Advance Medical Directive and Advanced Care Planning. And to do that, I will first invite Dr. Dhvani Mehta from Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. She is the co-founder of Vidhi Center for Legal Policy and the health lead. And like Dr. Raj said earlier, it's a privilege that a lawyer has decided to take up this cause with such passion, because for the rest of us, the legal world can be a completely unfathomable world, and we really need somebody with that expertise to navigate that space for us. And so, Dhvani, I'm really grateful that you're here, and thank you for all the work that you and your team have done over the years to make dying in India easier and a more dignified phenomenon. um, Dhvani, I'm going to just ask you, as a lawyer, what really brought you into the field of advanced care planning? And you've been working at this for so long. So the second part of my question is, uh, you've put together this incredible new template, the latest template for the Advanced Medical Directive, which is up on the IAPC website as well as Pallium. And going through it, what really stood out for me was the thoughtfulness behind it. And you've practically looked at every aspect of it, not just for the patient but also for the family. But what were the considerations when you were actually putting those together? So two parts to my question to you, so please go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. It's my privilege to be working on this issue. I always wanted to be a doctor. I couldn't be one, and so I feel like I'm doing the next best thing. And I hope I can continue in this space, providing the help and assistance that may be necessary. So we stumbled upon this field, by chance. I had studied medical law and ethics, in my postgraduate study in the United Kingdom. But the kinds of issues that we studied there and the context was very different from what was happening in India when I returned. So we learned of the petition that Common Cause had filed in the Supreme Court asking for the legalization of advanced medical directives, and we thought we would, again, in the kind of hubris of youth, thinking, oh, we have expert legal, expertise to offer. We can do comparative legal research across different jurisdictions. Let's assist the court and tell them what is happening in other countries and how they can learn from that in order to recognize advanced medical directives in India. So that was the first foray. But after that, quite by chance, we had a meeting with Dr. Roop in a Bombay cafe, and that has snowballed into work and association and the privilege of working with people like Dr. Rajagopal, Dr. Mani, Dr. Simha, Dr. Bhatnagar, and actually understanding what the issues on the ground are. It's not about winning a Supreme Court case or one legal victory was just the start of not even perhaps the solution. Initially, the 2018 victory felt like it was the start of a little bit of a problem as well. So it's only once we got into the issue and understood what the actual context was in which all this was playing out in India that I began to feel more invested and passionate about the issue as well. In fact, in the application that we helped the Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine file to modify the court's 2018 guidelines, the work became personal also because I used my aunt and my grandmother as test cases to demonstrate that the original procedure that the court had laid down to execute an advanced medical directive was not workable. My 83-year-old grandmother couldn't spend all day outside a district magistrate's court in Bhoiwada waiting for her directive to be registered. So uh, it became, and then it became apparent to me that this was something that affected everyone. My grandmother did ultimately pass away at home peacefully in accordance with her wishes. And again, I would never have known or been able to provide for that or facilitate that had I not been introduced to this wonderful community. So I feel my role as a lawyer has now, I have continued to re examine not just my role as a lawyer, but also the role of the law in this issue, as Dr. Rajagopal mentioned at the start of this talk. Um, I continue to see its role primarily as that of an enabler, and my role as a lawyer as someone who removes impediments to the delivery of, to performing a doctor's duty, as Dr. Rajagopal said, and to ensure that care is provided in the way in which it is supposed to be. The law is not there to tell us what medical care should be provided. The law is merely there to ensure that certain safeguards are, real or imagined, are met, and that processes are not abused. But I feel there has been a blurring of the boundaries between the law and medicine. And I hope, again, that as a more enlightened lawyer now, 10 years into this work, we can continue to facilitate a framework that respects these boundaries better. So that's the first. That's the answer to the first part of the question. To the second, first I want to really give a shout out to my colleagues Shreyoshi, Rituparna, and Nihal, who helped put together that all of these documents and who have invested it with the kind of thoughtfulness that it currently has. I'll speak briefly about the kinds of considerations that we had in mind when we were preparing the Advance Medical Directive. There was already a great template earlier that was up on the Pallium India website to work with. We just wanted to make sure, one, that of course the up to date version reflected the most recent Supreme Court guidelines, so the 2023 order. The most significant change being that the directive had to be executed before a notary or a gazetted officer and not before a magistrate. So, needed to modify it procedurally. During the hearings in court, the judges were also very concerned that the directive not mention only one person who holds a healthcare power of attorney. They kept asking us in court, well, what will happen if that person is not available or that person has died? And they insisted that the directive now mention at least two people in order of preference. So that is why you will see in this version of the directive that there is there are provisions for details of at least two healthcare power of attorneys, and they can be, you can always add more if you like. The other considerations in mind were that we just wanted it to be accessible to people who have to execute it, as well as to the treating team that has to interpret it and use it in a practical setting. So that can sometimes be a challenge, because we didn't want it to be overly have overly technical language, but at the same time provide enough clarity to doctors as well on what are the kinds of things that they should or should not do and how they should read it. And in some of this we were guided a little bit by case law in the UK and the US, where there is a more of a history of implementing advanced medical directives in certain states, at least in the US. And there is also now a body of case law on how some of these advanced medical directives have been misinterpreted or not. So one of the key principles is that you are not under an obligation as a member of a treating team to implement a directive that is vague, or where the language is unclear, or where the wishes that the patient has expressed are ambiguous. And there are a few examples of this kind of language in AMDs around the world. So, for example, some will write that we don't want any heroic measures, we don't want any extraordinary treatment. Now, courts have been called upon to interpret what is a heroic measure, what is extraordinary treatment. So, leaving it in language like this makes it difficult for doctors as well to understand what it is that the patient is trying to say. And so, again, some of the recommendations that we have and the language that we've used in the directive is to try and make it as specific as possible, to list the kinds of treatments that you don't wish to receive towards the end of life, and as well as for doctors to have to refer them to the definitions that the ICMR has already provided on terminal illness and end stage condition, persistent vegetative state, etc. Because sometimes, I'm drawing on case law from abroad, because we're only beginning to see some of that over here in India, and we don't have something to fall back on. There are instances where cases go to court because there is uncertainty about the applicability of the directive, whether the trigger condition has been met. Is a patient terminally ill or not? For example, in the US, there was a case where a patient had been diagnosed with AIDS. He had executed an AMD, but when he was brought to hospital, he was subjected to CPR. And the defense that the doctors took was that it had not yet been diagnosed as a terminal illness or an end stage condition. So it is we wanted to be sure in this directive that we were able to provide clear guidance to doctors as well on what the trigger conditions for the applicability of the directive are. The other considerations, and I'll be brief now, is that we wanted to create a basic template that, so if you will see in the document that there is room for people to add more about their specific beliefs or values, or about their um, wishes about their last rites, or their donation of their body, or donation of their organs, or add more specifics about their health conditions, take into account people's different gender identities, or the fact that, again, people may be in non-heteronormative relationships. Again, full credit to my colleagues for that. The thing is, we wanted to create a template that you can adopt as the basic. If you don't wish to add any of the other bits in the directive, you don't have to. But for those who want to invest more time and thought in this, and provide specific language that caters to their own condition, they should have the room to do that. And we just wanted to provide a guide as to where some of that language could come in. Now, of course, I mean, I know that there are other forms for organ donation, for body donation, etc., and that is done under other acts. But it made sense to us to put all of this together in a document that will be used at the end of life, again, so that it alerts your near ones and loved ones to what your wishes and preferences are at that stage. And finally, we wanted to ensure that the directive, of course, meets all the requirements that the Supreme Court has said that it must have. The court's judgment itself lays down some criteria for what a directive should state, especially the bits about a person being of sound mind and not having made it under any duress or undue influence or coercion. So we have added those as well. And we also wanted to try and fill in gaps in, given that there are no guidelines currently from any state government or the union government on how this will actually be implemented. So what is it that a healthcare power of attorney can actually do? Apart from taking decisions, they should also be the one that your treating team has conversations with, the one with whom they will share your medical data or your personal information. So we have added more details like this to nudge people towards fleshing this out, because we don't currently have any legislative or even executive framework that we can work with. So these were some of the considerations, and above all, to try and make it as simple and easy to read as possible, which is not always easy for lawyers like us.
Thank you, Dhvani. Thank you so much. I can see that there are lots of responses in the chat box, and I just want to assure people, especially people like Ashish, who've asked technical questions, that we will come to that towards the second half of this. I mean, when we're in the discussion section of this webinar. So we will come to the questions that people have posed. I think what you really highlighted for us, Dhvani, I mean, thank you. I mean, the work that has gone in, I think we only know a fraction of it, but it's good to know, where this originated for you and for your team and what's brought you to this place. I think what has really come through is, first of all, I will still encourage everybody here to access the FAQs document. I can see a lot of quite fundamental questions being posed. All of those questions are in the FAQs document, so please do take your time. It's a 37-page document. You will find a lot of the answers there. So I will take questions that we can ask the panelists specifically to answer. But for the more basic questions, I would still encourage you to look at the FAQs document. The While this is a very fluid sort of space, even now, I mean, we're far from where we want to be in terms of very clear-cut, definitive um, laws, things that will encourage doctors to feel a little bit more safe when they're entering this space, because I know that even healthcare providers are very unclear. They don't know, if some things lie in the realm of legality or not, and what it might do in terms of their own hospital policies and things. So we're far from achieving that. And but at the same time, I really want to remind everybody here that if you just look at that advanced medical directive document and sit down for a few minutes or an hour and go through each of those, the thought process that opens up, these are things that we've probably never thought of for ourselves. Like Dhvani said, some things we think of as extraordinary measures. These are a lot of the language we have borrowed from the West, or we've borrowed from a slightly more, I would say, sensationalist literature. But if you were to sit down with those specifics that Dhvani has talked about, it will really get you thinking on where you are. And I think the most important part of this whole process is having the conversation with the people in your family, with the people that you love, the people that you want to appoint as your healthcare power of attorneys. Because if you do those things, there is a good chance that that will itself preempt you from being in a situation where where these very difficult decisions have to be made of withholding and withdrawing life support and so on. Because I think if your family already knows what your preferences are, it makes it a lot easier for them to also make the right decision. So I would really want to underscore that point, that having this conversation, sitting with this document, discussing it with your loved ones, could possibly be the most important thing that you do. I will, however, just pick out two questions, because in keeping with the momentum that Dhvani has taken us through, there's one question, Dhvani, which is it possible to get the living will registered in another place and than the one that you're living in? And this comes from Jasuja, who lives in the NCR in Gurgaon, and they are skeptical about the living will. So, can she get it registered in Delhi, and how does one proceed? And she has taken the decision for her husband to go and not put on life support in the past. So that's one question: the location of where this document needs to be deposited. So if you could answer that one, please, that will be very helpful.
Sure, sure. I've just typed an answer in the chat as well, but yeah, I'll clarify it here. I think a living will can be executed in any place. And by that, I mean it can be signed by you, the witnesses, and the notary or the gazetted officer in any location. After that is done, you are usually required to send a copy of it to your local authority, who will act as a custodian of that document. So, in that case, my sense is that you will still have to send a notarized copy of it to the local authority in Gurgaon, which will be the Gurugram Municipal Corporation. Um, and not Delhi, because a municipal council in Delhi may not think it has the jurisdiction to register a will from a person who is not residing in their jurisdiction. So, but as to where you can execute it, that you can do anywhere.
Thank you, Dhvani. And I think that also sort of answers Ruparna Khurana's question of what happens after it's notarized. So, like we said, this process is still being clarified, and it a lot depends on the jurisdiction that you're in. So, I'll move on now to thank you, Dhvani. Thank you so much for really simplifying a lot of complicated, issues for us. Dr. Roop, are you here? If you can unmute.
I'm here. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Welcome, 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 Dr. Roop.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, yeah, I can. I've been hearing all this. I've been responding in the chat, but unfortunately, the way my connection is, I'm in Goa, so it's not very good. But anyway, go on.
Okay, so Dr. Roop Gursahani is a consulting neurologist at Hinduja Hospital in Bombay. He has been a co-founder of Elicit, which is the End of Life Care in India task force, and is also part planning task force at the national level. And Roop has been part of this journey, I think, right from the start. And just to give some context, Roop was also uh, one of the doctors who was called in to assess Aruna Shanbag in the now famous Aruna Shanbag case. So, Dr. Roop, I just want to, ask you. Um, we've been talking about the Advanced Medical Directive, but just to take a couple of steps back, can you just talk to us about what is the difference between advanced care planning and all of these other terms that we've heard? The Advanced Medical Directive, do not resuscitate, do not intubate, CPR, all of these things, because I think to non-medical people, sometimes this can get a little bit convoluted. So if you can just make the distinction between all of these different terms, that would be really great.
Right. So the thing is that advanced care planning is an umbrella term, and it stretches all the way from the living will to the healthcare power of attorney to do not attempt resuscitation orders to something called physician's orders for life support treatment, which is pretty valid in the US, to even organ donation forms. This 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 whole term basically actually is just death literacy, and it basically means us putting down on paper what it is that matters to us at the end of life when we cannot speak. And in fact, like you said, if you look at these documents individually, and Dhvani has explained to you that there are obviously legal complexities, and our systems are still grappling with uh, making these workable across jurisdictions and stuff like that. One part of it is simple. We are 40 years behind the rest of the world, and we don't really need to reinvent the wheel. All this has been sorted out in great detail, especially in the United States. The United States is the world's laboratory for all of this, because partly because each state did their own thing, and in 50 states and 50, you can imagine how many different things were sorted out. So you can get legal precedents for everything there. But the bigger part of it is that if you look at it in terms of this being death literacy, just as we have to have health literacy, you also have to have death literacy. What will happen towards the end of life? How will your last days pass? You have enough people writing books about how to live till 120 and beyond. But what will happen in the 120th year? Does anybody think of that? So it's important for all of us to think of what will happen in our last years of life, whether they are at the age of 80, 60, 40, 120, whatever. And thinking that through, preferably at a stage when you can do this thinking and are still fit enough to make these decisions. That is what advanced care planning is. If somebody thinks that if they are left with brain damage, they would not want to survive, and that they would want their organs to be taken out at that stage, right? Yeah, somebody can think about that at the age of 20. You don't need to reach whatever age it is. All of these discussions, and this discussion finally, although we are prioritizing the document, this discussion has to be had with those close to you, the people you choose to implement those decisions, and the healthcare system. So you need actually a system that makes your wishes workable when you can no longer speak. That is what advanced care planning is all about.
Thank you. Thanks, Roop. And I will also just ask you one more question. And that is, I know there have been several questions in the chat also regarding various specific settings, but you're a neurologist, and I mean, the trajectory of illness and dying is different when it comes to, say, oncological issues and so on. And then, the way I see it is that people with neurological conditions have a very, uh, well, uh, uniquely difficult set of uh, issues to deal with. And you, as a neurologist, I want to ask, how do you see advanced care planning changing an outcome for the patient as well as for you as a physician providing care?
So actually, somebody asked about how about advanced care planning for a patient with MS.
Hmm.
To some extent, it doesn't change, and partly, this is something that I'm going to actually take 2 or 3 steps back and really talk about this. So, if you look at decision making towards the end of life, right? It's basically shared decision making. and shared decision making between the patient ideally, but if not the patient, then whoever speaks for the patient and the medical team, right? And depending on how these decisions are made, it may be a decision for withdrawal of life support, or maybe even doing everything possible, whatever one chooses. But these decisions ideally are made in advance and kind of put down in a document. So we term this end of life care decision making, right? Now, please understand that this is a cart which needs a horse, and that horse is advanced care planning, right? Now, whether the horse and the cart are yoked together at the beginning of the illness, before an illness, during an illness, at the last stages, by somebody else, that really doesn't matter. In fact, the one thing that I think that even people in palliative care find difficult to grapple with is that in oncology, beyond a certain point, once the second chemotherapy has failed, it is cancer biology that calls all the shots. There's no ethics, there's no law, nothing. The cancer drives the prognosis. In neurology, that is not the case. Nor is it even in nephrology or cardiology or respiratory, anyone else. Their ethics come in, their medical education, literacy comes in. There, that is where the law comes in. If you say somebody has metastatic terminal cancer, unlike that patient with the vegetative state in Delhi, I wonder what the High Court judge would have said. It's purely because he couldn't grapple with the idea that somebody was not alive and not dead. And that is why you had that. If anybody's not read Times of India editorial today, you should. I mean, at least whoever wrote that got it spot on. That judgment was terrible. Sorry, Dhvani. You'll have to defend me if I get caught for contempt of court.
No, yeah, that I'll happily do. I'm sure I'll be called up for it even before you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roop. I've just shared the link to that Times of India article, the editorial. It's there in the chat just now. And thank you for actually very sensitively, making these points, because um, we have, I think, on other occasions talked about the waterfall trajectory which people experience in conditions like cancer, but with other conditions, it can be a very slow, very painful, very prolonged experience. So thank you for all those points that you've made about decision making capacity. And what we'll also do is compile a list of the questions and answers in the chat box and try and send it out to all the participants so that we can revisit them. I know it's difficult to split your attention between the conversation in the chat box and what the panelists are talking about. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to now move to our final panelist, and that is Dr. Parth Sharma. Parth is a public health researcher and has published numerous articles, has published many, many studies. And for someone so young, I find it quite astonishing that the breadth and the depth that which he explores. Parth is also with the with ASAR, which is the Association for Socially Applicable Research. So there's a lot of interesting work of his out there. If you Google his name, you will find it. Parth, my question is basically, having written so extensively about such a subject. I mean, you talked about palliative care, you've done research on cancer, you've done research on death and dying. Um, I'm really keen to know, um, what about this issue affects you so much at this point in your life and career? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going on. I don't need to say this, but I'm really quite intrigued by what has made you so passionate about it when you are you're on the ascent, or you're on the ascendant in your career. You're at this point where you have all these opportunities, and yet you have decided that this is the topic you want to really pay attention to. So I'm really intrigued about that. And what about this issue affects you not just as a doctor, but as a young person in India?
Thanks, Smriti, for giving me this opportunity to be here. I think the only expertise I have is being young in this group and being a very fresh graduate. I remember the first death or the first conversation I had with a dying person was when I was an intern. It was my first posting in surgery department, and I love talking to people and getting to know who they are. I like asking people, "What's your story?" And I remember this patient from Bangladesh who had cancer of the rectum, and he was telling me how afraid he was of dying because his daughters were at home, and he showed me their drawings that they had sent him, and that's when I started understanding fears of people, when they were nearing the end of life. And eventually I realized even my awareness was not very great. I remember uh, I was at the age of 23, I was working in the department of medical oncology, and I was seeing people die almost on a regular basis. And I remember being called to insert an NG tube for almost a 90-year-old person who had bilateral stroke, so both hands and both upper limbs, lower limbs paralyzed, both vocal cords paralyzed. He was in a vegetative state, but he had some delirium and he had pulled out his NG. Our NG got displaced, and I had been asked to put it back. While I was inserting it, he aspirated and he had a cardiac arrest. He was the father of a professor at CMC. Uh, so I asked sir, and like, sir, should I resuscitate? What do you want? And he's like, yes, please resuscitate. And I remember giving chest compressions for 30 minutes, and I could feel everything break under my hands. I could feel the chest bones break. And but at the end of the 30 minutes, I was quite happy that the heartbeat came back. I mean, as a very young doctor, I was very proud of myself that I saved a life. He eventually died 2 days later. But I remember the scene of the ICU bed, with him, with all the machines around him, with all the lines, injections. He couldn't, obviously, he was not able to talk to anybody before that illness itself. And now he died. Then now when I look back, I ask myself, was that the best that somebody should see their relative in their last days? Was that the best scene? I also remember that another lady who had ovarian cancer. She was around 50, 55. And the most fascinating discussion I remember having after rounds with my senior was that, she's on first line of chemotherapy. She'll do really well. Even if she progresses, we can offer her these. I was in medical oncology and very eager to learn. So I had read up everything about ovarian cancer and all the possible lines of chemotherapy. So I was telling my professor after rounds, trying to impress him that, I know that we can, even if she progresses on first line, we have second line, third line, fourth line, fifth line. And I was very impressed. He was very impressed that I knew all that. That lady died that evening. She had a rest that evening, and I again remember giving her chest compressions for like 32 minutes to 45 minutes because I wanted to save her. Because I was like, no, in the morning only I told that she'd live for years, because I could have given her 5 lines of chemotherapy. So eventually I learned with all these experiences, and there was one lady with cervical cancer who came in. And this time I made sure I talked to the relatives almost on a daily basis about death, the kids and the husband. So eventually, when she reached those last days, they didn't want her to go to the ICU. They were in the ward. And thanks to Dr. Rajagopal's book, I mean, that all itself has taught me so much. I asked them, are you okay with me giving her morphine? Because she was in that terminal state of breathlessness. And it was not a very good sight for a daughter and a son to see their mother in. And they agreed. And just giving some morphine to her, she became calm. And those were her last moments, peacefully breathing towards the end of her life, with daughter holding her hand. So that really changed my whole experience of death, because now I saw something which was not as cruel as something which I had personally been a part of or caused previously. So all this has sort of pushed me to now talk more and more about death and what we should do. And the biggest problem that I see, that why this is happening to us, is I feel because now the culture of medical education is as such that it's mainly about normal, what normal is, and normal is mostly a range. It's a range of parameters. Saturation above 88% is normal. I was in the ICU during COVID first wave, and I remember there was somebody who had been in the ICU for almost 40 days on the ventilator. The lungs were fully fibrosed, And the professor came and did something on the ventilatory machine, and the saturation went up to 90, and we were also happy. And we wanted to ask him, what magic did you do that I was not able to maintain saturation of 85 and now it crossed 90? So that was our the glamour, the glamour of diagnosing and reaching the normal range, normal parameters. That was what was fascinating. I never thought about this guy. I used to hold a camera, video call his wife every day for him, and the wife, he wouldn't be able to talk, but the wife is just watching him there. So that was, I never thought about that side of suffering. For me, a saturation of 90 was my target. So this very extremely poor literacy in doctors, in patients. I remember again, the next year I was in emergency, and COVID second wave came, and normally a lot of cancer patients were also coming to emergency. And there was a person, again 85, stage 4 lung cancer, and I'm talking to the doctor for now half an hour that this should be palliative intent, we should not take him to the ICU. But the daughter was a doctor as well, but she was adamant that he has to go to the ICU. So I had to intubate again. I'm not sure what he wanted because he was not responsive. So there are a lot of problems, starting with our culture in the society, how we are so afraid of death. And as a young person, when I see all this around me, the one question which comes to my mind is, will I die the same way? Will I have a say in it when my last days come? And like Dr. Roop said, we can have this discussion at 20. Why not? Because when I die, I would like my organs to be donated. But who should I tell this to? And thanks to the work that is happening now, I do have a say in it, and I can do something about it. So yeah, I mean, that's the reason that I do what I do, because of these stories and experiences. And I also have been a part of the problem, and now coming out of it, I think I can possibly do something about it.
Thanks, Parth. I'll just one more follow-up question. Um, because people are so uncomfortable around the death word, um, how would what would you say to your peers? I mean, you're sitting here with us. There's a bunch of us who really care about this issue, but your peers and your contemporaries, what would you say to them at this point?
I would say just look at the person, not at the disease. And the movie Patch Adams has this very famous dialogue: you treat the disease, you win or lose, and you treat the person, you always win. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to just look at the person as a whole, and even ask ourselves, would I like to be in that stage, the way they are? We might be, I remember having duties 50 to 60 hours long without sleeping while I was in medical oncology. But it's not as bad as being a patient. No matter how tough your duties are, it can never be as bad as that of a patient. So I understand India's health system is quite overburdened. Doctors don't have the time, but trust me, it doesn't take more than 3 to 5 minutes. If you start practicing it, you'll realize just listening to somebody for at least 3 to 5 minutes does a lot of difference. It's not we think at the back of our minds that it'll take half an hour. The person will start crying, and patients are very much aware that doctors lack time, so they themselves don't want to trouble anybody, and just giving them those 3 minutes actually does a lot of help to them. So give them that space. Like Dr. IP Yadav said, now patients come and cry. And personally, that is my agenda. When somebody comes to me and they cry in front of me, I feel very good. I feel that I've done something useful, given them somebody a space to cry in front of me. So I feel that's okay. I mean, we have to have the courage to take somebody else's pain and sort of understand it, and that requires a lot of courage. And yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Rajagopal's book definitely helps with that. To sit in a room and feel that pain without being on the field and knowing how to react. So I would suggest my peers, at least, or whoever is listening, to read that book and sit in a room, cry for a while, and then try to figure out, if that happened in real life, how would you react to it?
Thank you. Thanks, Parth. Listening to you gives, I'm sure, all of us a lot of hope for the future of medicine, and I hope more and more people start to think like you. I'd like to just acknowledge the fact that we have had some very interesting questions, and I also want to thank Dr. Raj, Dr. Roop, Dr. Dhvani, Savita, Dr. Savita Butola, and various others who've been helping answer these questions in the chat as we go along, because it makes my life a lot easier. I was just reading all the questions and thinking, my God, how are we going to go through all these questions and answers? But thank you very much. And like I said, we will collate all these questions and answers and share it with people, so that if you've missed some of these answers, then you're able to read them again later. Um, there's one question that I will pick out again from the chat, and that is open to everybody here. And this seems like a very important question that we need to answer. How do we advocate for the patient as healthcare workers uh, for advanced care planning if the family does not care about it? And I think this is an important one. How do we, as healthcare providers, no matter our specialty, advocate for this for on behalf of the patient? Roop, would you like to answer that?
Uh, sure. So, uh, basically, I mean, when families look at this topic, they come to it from a position of love, and you want to protect somebody you love. And protection for many people means preventing death. So, for me as a doctor, once I'm confident of prognosticating, and prognosticating means looking at the future, right? But uh, it's not just looking at the future, it's also foretelling the future. So, foresight and foretelling both have to go together. If you can communicate that to the family, and unfortunately, many of us, as we get more and more senior, foresight is there, but the commitment to foretelling is not there. And there is a simple reason for that. We are not trained in communication skills. What Parth said is very correct. Just listen for 5 minutes. We've not been trained to listen. So, because we don't listen, because we jump in first, whatever we want to foretell doesn't go through. Once you manage that, there is no family that says, I want my old man to suffer till the last minute. Impossible. But somebody has to get that across. I mean, I look at the two examples of uh, people who've seen my lectures have seen this, that in 2018, the Bushes, Barbara and George, passed away at home, literally in Darbar, surrounded by their families. At the same age, literally at the same age, Atal Bihari Vajpayee died in the AIMS ICU after 2 weeks in the ICU. In the last few days, he was on something called ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. I mean, that's obscene. A 94-year-old dying of dementia, uh, it is impossible. Again, Lata Mangeshkar getting intubated twice in the 90s. So there is no family, once we explain to them, who will not get it.
Thank you. Thanks, Roop. Um, I will also quickly just take a few more questions from the chat, which have not yet been answered. And Dhvani, if I may direct this one to you, Dr. Stanley McCadden asks, how can legal support help curb commercial medicine, especially in the last days or weeks of life?
That's a tough one. I mean, I don't know whether the law is the right tool for curbing. Sorry, what was the exact question? How can it
Curb
curb
commercial
commercial medicine? Yeah, I mean, again, for me, the answer is, of course, you need to have doctors who are appropriately trained in ethics, in the latest standard treatment guidelines. And yes, okay, the law can help if these standard treatment guidelines or these are incorporated in statute and become a statutory duty. Um, but what is the recourse if someone does indulge in commercial medicine, if they do undertake unethical practices? Currently, what are your what is the legal recourse you have? You can file a complaint with a state medical council, or you can take a doctor to court for medical negligence. I'm just simply, one is, the state medical councils don't have the best record of disciplining and holding doctors to account for these kinds of practices. And consumer court cases, even though they're supposed to be quicker forms of relief, are not going to give you the kind of satisfaction you want. So, I mean, my question here back to Dr. Stanley would be, why do we want the law to curb commercial medicine? I feel like there are better avenues within the medical community, within the regulation of the medical profession itself, that need to be explored. The law can be a kind of, an extremely heavy stick that you apply. But I'm not so convinced that it's the right answer to curbing these kinds of practices. There can be hygiene, there can be certain minimum things that the law can do, and so, as I said, these can be about incorporating certain standards and duties of care in statutes. But until regulatory systems are strengthened, especially in terms of state medical councils, and unless there is appropriate education about this kind of commercial medicine, I'm not so convinced that the law will be effective in the way we want it to be.
Can I come in here, Smriti?
Yes,
So I
please.
probably, yeah. So there are a couple of components to this. One component is that if you look at anybody going into the ICU, typically the maximum, sorry to put it that way, costs or the revenue generated is in the first 3 to 5 days. Any place where a patient is kept in the ICU beyond 5 days and is just lingering on the ventilator is a bad ICU, because they're wasting their beds on a patient where they are not really earning anything much. So, in fact, it's sensible for administrators to figure out, to try it, to figure out where somebody cannot be salvaged and to move them off to palliative care or to shift them out. Any ICU that hangs on to patients beyond, say, about 5 to 7 days without clear discussions is a bad ICU. I have a standard quip, which I'm not sure it's really true. Perhaps it answers Dr. McAdam's question, and that is that corporate hospitals are those where the poor cannot enter and the rich cannot leave. Now, sure, a lot of people would agree with that, but a good hospital will not hold on to you when you are no longer salvageable. That is its basic common sense. And if,
Nandini,
sorry, I think I will.
sorry, Roop. No. I just came in because Nandini asked who will decide who's salvageable. Just to.
So that I think is part of our business of training our uh, peers, our colleagues, of actually looking at these issues in the eye. Prognosis was once one of the three major responsibilities of physicians: diagnosis, treatment, prognosis. Right from the time of Hippocrates, foreseeing and foretelling. When did it drop away? Sometime in the 50s, 60s, 70s, as medicine became better and better, people could go into ICUs critically ill and then walk out. And we stopped realizing that there was a point beyond which medical technology could not win against biology. We recognize that. And typically, I mean, the situation that Parth spoke of, a 90 plus year old undergoing CPR with his son, is quite unusual. Typically, doctors know when they have to stop. But yeah, these things do happen.
So thank you very much. I'm just going to also address one point. I mean, we have very few minutes left, but I think this is an important point, and I'd like to thank Joseph for highlighting it. Have these ideas and discussions about palliative care, the right to die with dignity, AMDs, etc., been incorporated into medical education in India so that at least the future patients and relatives don't have to struggle? Dr. Raj, I'd like to direct that question to you because you have worked extensively on that. So if you could unmute, please, and answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you for that important question. And I'm glad I have something positive to say. Yes, when the then Indian Medical Council revised its curriculum in 2017. Effective from 2019 onwards, they put in a module on end-of-life care there. It's competency-based curriculum. And that, if taught properly, that solves the problem. But between putting it into the curriculum and actually implementing it in the more than 600 medical colleges in the country, that's a huge task that we all are taking together. By the way, uh, our training team led by Dr. Sridevi Warrior has been conducting faculty development workshops. Empowering faculties of medical, interested faculty members of medical colleges to teach pain management, end of life care, attitude, ethics, and communication, those modules in the medical curriculum. I think if somebody from Pallium India will share that link. Oh, Shreya had already shared the link to palliumindia.org training. And any faculty member who wants to do it, please empower yourself.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Raj. And Gina has just shared that link in the chat. We just have 2 minutes left. And as it usually happens with these kinds of conversations, the big questions start coming in the second half. And I'm very sorry that we don't have the time to answer some of these very big questions. What we will try and do is we will circulate these questions amongst the panelists, and we will try and then post them in addition to the FAQs document somewhere, because some of these are very important questions, but I'm very sorry we don't have the time for it. I'd just like to start winding the session down. And if you like, please write into info@palliumindia.org with any specific questions that have not yet been asked here that we may miss. And I just want to thank, firstly, I want to come back to thank Dr. Yadev. Dr. Yadev, this webinar was your brainchild. And I think hearing you today was one of the most powerful experiences many of us have had. I'd like to thank you again for it. And I wish you, every success in your palliative care career. And we're very lucky to have you. And thank you also to Dhvani, to Dr. Raj, to Parth, to Roop. Thank you all very much for being here with your valuable insights, and also for a very engaged and interactive audience. This is a conversation that has only just begun. So this is not the only conversation we're going to have. As part of our advanced care planning task force, we intend to bring many such activities across the country. So if you'd like us to engage in a smaller group in your community, if you can bring together people, we will be happy to do advanced medical directive workshops or awareness raising sessions. So we're open to that. So please do get in touch if that's something that you would like. If there is something that you'd like to share in terms of your own experiences, do share that with us as well, because we really need to build the evidence as to why this conversation is so important. And we can only do that when all of you engage with us, because otherwise, it's very easy to get cerebral about it, but you have to stay in touch with the stories on the ground. And if you have tried to write out your living will, if you have had any difficulties or barriers that you have faced, do write to us, because we really like to know what that is, so that with every iteration or every effort that is made to make the um, process easier, we are informed by your experience. So thank you very much. We have recorded this session. We will be sharing it. And thank you very much. And also, one last thing I'd like to address. Somebody has asked, how do we have this conversation in our families? Please visit the Conversation Project. It is an American website, but you will find a lot of very important resources there to start the conversation within your own home. And we are also working on making that available in India to our Indian context. So thank you, good night, and have a good rest of the evening. And thank you to all panelists. And thank you also to the Indian Association for Palliative Care for supporting this. Thank you.